We have a movie tonight, huh?
Wow, what's that aftershave you're wearing?
Your high karate aftershave is so powerful, it drives women right out of their minds. That's why we have to put instructions on self-defense in every package. High karate. High karate. Be careful how you use it.
The Wall Street Journal reported that the Oscar nominees support sales for the cologne soaring. And
for the license to kill women.
You have clicked on this video either out of curiosity, passion, or frustration because it is so hard to shop for the perfect men's cologne, whether for you or for someone else. But rather, instead of talking about the best men's cologne on the market, because there's so many videos all about that, I think we should dive a little deeper into the ad semantics of men's cologne advertisements. How there's a secret underlying grip with misogyny, with purity culture, and with toxic masculinity. What is the semantics of taste? The politics of what it means to smell like a man. Without further ado, let's get into today's topic. By the way, BT Dubs, my name is Mila Duffy. I'm a beauty editor and culture writer on Substack, where I am also an aspiring TV writer. I love to talk about the beauty industry and media studies through a feminist lens, so we can figure out what the beauty industry and media is trying to tell us about us as a collective rather than just consumers, so we could become icons on and offline and become the next generation of beauty gurus. Now, without further ado, let's get into today's thesis. How does the semantics of smell and advertising in men's cologne perpetuate toxic masculinity and culture? Whoops. In the 1960s and 70s, there was a fragrance called high karate, that is how you're supposed to pronounce it, correct, with an advertisement that started the trend of self-defense against women because you smelled too good. With no context in its absurdity and bluntness of a hunter-prey dynamic, treating it as a joke sounds a lot like locker room talk, in my opinion. Dubbed by decade-old comments on YouTube as the Axe body spray of the 1970s. It seems to be a beginning of a long string of decades of a gag, of a ruse, where the gag copy of fragrance commercials for men always seems to put the brunt of women in the joke. Men's cologne is framing itself as a hazard to women, inherently making it sound like that when a man wears it, they are a hazard to women as well. Could it be seen as a threat when women are used as objects for the male gaze when advertising men's cologne as an objective to hunt or attract? It could be seen as a threat to their inhibitions, but rather to the social junction of their safety. Another example is the Brut brand, where they use very macho advertising to, well, advertise men's cologne. But this was a different breed from the humor of high karate, and instead experienced this very gritty, dark-esque kind of philosophy. Through iconic packaging and celebrity endorsement, the brand is marketing itself as the essence of a man, where in the US, athletes like Joe Naman, Muhammad Ali, and a bunch others were used to advertise that cologne. The scent profile of famous Brut smells involve things like bergamot, lemon, and basil, jasmine, and oak moss, musk, velveteer, and sandalwood. But we are not here to criticize the way it smells. For what it sounds like, I bet it would smell quite lovely despite the silliness and also despite the bruntness of the marketing. The problem, though, is the positioning. It's the semantics of its advertisements. A multitude of studies revolving around the media analysis of men's cologne showed the sexual behavior an indication of the fact that there is a direct link between the objectification of women and the median advertising and the violence against women being normalized in their collective societies. Let me say that again. There is a direct link between the objectification of women in the advertisement medium that inherently is also a direct link to violence against women in those collective societies where those ads are perpetuated and where those ads are normalized. To elaborate on the study from the Archive of Sexual Behavior from 2015, I wanted to actually look into the abstract of the study. For example, data was gathered from collegiate men's sexual attraction to women and consisted with expectations associated between men's exposure to objectifying media and attitudes supporting of violence against women were mediated by their notions of women as sexual objects, specifically frequency of exposure to men's lifestyle magazines, the objectification of women, reality TV shows, and their objectification of women, and pornographic predictions, more objective cognitions of women, which in turn predicted stronger attitudes supporting of violence against women. In even non-sexual media, there is something called sexual scripting, which is basically the actification and application of the socialization of gender norms, which inherently can be very restricting. We even see these in articles, in advertisements, in men's lifestyle magazines, and it does seem that the objectification and the restricting viewpoint on women is still active in non-sexual media. It also goes for not just a regular body spray commercial where you have to fend off women, it also has to do when women are being associated with objects, whether it's a scantily clad woman rubbing herself on a car,
Keep it in your pants, maybe.
or wearing a t-shirt with a beer bottle, when it's just a creative narrative cognition, a shorthand for women and consumables. Objects end up shaping attitudes and supporting the violence against women. To continue our education on this, I recommend the Killing Us Softly series by Dr. Jean Kilbourne, who pioneered media research demonstrating that advertising reduces women in body parts or sexual props, creating a cultural climate that normalizes and trivializes the ultimate unjustified violence against women. Over 40 years of working in advertising in the late 1960s and then working in research, she discusses several things. She talks about how back in the 60s, limitations for women in the workplace and women careers were, of course, very limited. It was either secretary, waitress, or even, surprisingly, a model, showing that sometimes women had no choice but to participate in these sexist campaigns for the sake of their livelihoods. National watchdog organizations such as in the UK or the ASA, Advertising Standards Authority, force a strict code against social irresponsibility and harmful gender stereotypes. Now, what does the ASA do? Well, if they find that a brand is irresponsibly perpetuating these stereotypes and being really harmful in their advertising, they might put a ban on the viewership of their advertisements in specific areas. This mainly happens with things in video games, clothing brands, and so forth, but it can happen to most of any consumable goods. However, it seems that this type of animosity with men's cologne and their advertisements is unheard of. In fact, the majority of these type of complaints and bans can come from advertisements that relate to women-centered industries like women's perfume, women's clothing, as we've seen in specific samples later in this video. Why are we not policing men's cologne advertisements? So we'd have to wonder, how did the second wave of feminism relate to the new era of targeted beauty and fragrance advertising? What is the contemporary critiques that we have to go off with now? And how come there really isn't any that are loud and proudly critiquing men's cologne advertisements for perpetuating purity culture? And of course, toxic masculinity, which go hand in hand. Here are also some great data points on the Grandview research and reporting platform on how companies and industries are relating to cologne and fragrances. For example, data from the global fragrance industry shows that it generates over $63 billion in revenue annually, and proves that men's cologne commercials are highly effective at driving sales, building brand equity, and of course, establishing long-term customer loyalty. Because consumers cannot smell a product through a screen, brands rely heavily on aspirational or psychological marketing to sell an identity rather than just a scent. Basically, when it comes to men's cologne advertisements, there is proof that they actually lead to sales, no matter what is happening in the commercial, no matter who is in the commercial. With high ROI and market growth, even when it comes to things like Gen Z's and millennial adoption, younger demographics are highly responsive to fragrance advertisements more than the average consumer. According to consumer data, 74% of male teens wear fragrance every day, and 35% of Gen Z men report spending over $200 annually on cologne. Commercials targeting this demographic utilize brand storytelling on platforms like TikTok and Instagram, effectively using influencer partnerships to turn cologne into a key market for personal identity. That, and we see the power of innate storytelling through aspirational buying. Because smell vision does not exist yet,
It's television.
It's walkable.
Commercials compensate by depicting elite, confident, and rugged lifestyles that end up becoming a narrative shorthand for a very limited perspective of what masculinity could be, such as celebrities in the wilderness or a couple in the Mediterranean. The strategy builds on emotional connection. Research into advertising discourse shows that viewers connect to the powerful, confident atmosphere of these commercials to the scent, leading them to believe that spraying the same perfume will help them embody that aspirational lifestyle. And in a realm where we all just want to look max, look max, look max, look max, and we all just want to be self-improving and self-improving, self-improving, and never being still of how we are, men are on the self-improvement journey. They want to keep making themselves better and better and better. We cannot help it. We live in an aspirational society because of capitalism. We just want to keep moving forward. According to an article from Brand Hopper, prior to the 2010s, majority of men's body care and cologne advertisements involved women as being a conquest. And rather than focusing on men's hygiene and self-care, it was about the hunt. It was about perpetuating a hunt and prey mentality. These historically center around narratives of external validation and sexual conquest, as in order to be seen as esteemed, you must be seductive. Visually, a campaign promises the automatic attraction of women, therefore inherently saying that one's value only comes from how well liked you are by women? Question mark.
What are you doing?
I just got some new Old Spice body washes for myself.
Those aren't for you, those are for me.
Relax. With lavender.
Look, this Old Spice stuff, it's for men.
This body wash is for you.
Yeah.
No, that's all.
What are you doing? It's for men.
No.
It wasn't until much later that brands started pivoting to the self-care and identity building aspect of men's cologne advertisements when brands like Dove for men started to launch in 2010, challenging these traditional roles. The mass marketing brands before the 2010s treat fragrance strictly as a currency, a tool of mating rather than a vehicle for self-expression or personal satisfaction. There is a really big issue with that. Because if we have the likelihood that we're not giving men the emotional resource to build identity, to build self-worth, to build a concrete individual self-concept, and rather having them just focus on chasing and being attracted, it is basically causing men to not know who the fuck they are. And this goes beyond men cologne commercials as well, where men's cologne commercials, the epitome of mystique, masculinity, and aspirational storytelling, happen to still perpetuate really minor beliefs, minor little roles of what men should be, along with also showing how everything is hostile towards women, where you have to be gentle, lady killer, blah blah blah, bunch of women chasing you on the beach. It's all about either chasing or hurting women in some capacity. The narrative being built contradicts the inhibitions brought on by modern society. It's not just that men's cologne advertisements seem to be anti-women. In a lot of ways, it's seeming to perpetuate harmful attitudes towards women. It happens to be that according to the Old Spice internal research, they actually found that 60 to 85% of men's body wash and grooming products are actually purchased by women in their lives. So why is it that women are buying stuff that's being advertised against them for the people that they love? According to an article from Riffon, Old Spice's turnaround succeeded by targeting female shoppers, as seen in advertisements depicting women stealing men's body washes designed for them, under the impression that women get everything and then this one thing is for the man in their life. Just this one thing, don't take it from us. Which is ironic because I like to think that men basically have everything they could ever want automatically designed for them, because the neutral pathway to the lens of TV, film, life, careers, and even like products and marketing is inherently through the male gaze. So even if it doesn't seem gendered, it's inherently masculine. It shows also that the patriarchy plays a pivotal role in men's decision making rather than just them themselves. Also keep in mind that the majority of the purchasing power in the US is predominantly women, because we're not just buying stuff for ourselves, we're buying stuff for other people, for the household, for everything. Flipping the transaction of the male gaze dynamic on its head is knowing one core thing. For example, according to an academic peer-reviewed study titled Construing Masculinity in Men's Perfume Advertising, a systematic, functional, multimodal discourse analysis. Bougie. Basically, according to this academic paper, it utilizes a system of analysis that has broken down how print and video advertisements construct modern masculinity. Studies analyzing men's fragrance campaigns in major publications like Cosmopolitan and Men's Health demonstrate that visual and linguistic tropes consistently pair fragrance with traits of extreme dominance, emotional detachment, and intense self-seriousness. These studies highlight how the archetype of the new man is in perpetuation with the alpha consumer, built on the foundation of isolation from family or from domestic life, framing the male body as a standalone monument of power and to territorial control. This academic research confirms that fragrance ads is not just about how it smells. They reinforce a rigid, systematic vocabulary that links manhood to dominance, emotional unavailability, and boundary transgressions and intensity. Basically, things that are heavily restricting and can lead also to violence and violent behavior. And I'll get into that in a moment because it's a really strong connection. Because if we already know that male cologne advertisements already have a disposition to objectifying women, especially for the cheap stuff like Axe body spray, and then we're basically seeing new studies and old ones that show that when we have the objectification of women or women being associated either next to or holding objects, it actually has a direct link between that and the tolerance of violence against women in those societies where those commercials are aired. Paired with this study that shows that men's cologne advertisements inherently are pushing a narrative of really restricted view on what manhood is supposed to be, we are now getting this perfect trifecta where we are in the eye of the hurricane and we are seeing basically this messaging that's being forefront to everyone's brains of men, you are meant to be a hunter. You are meant to be an alpha consumer, someone who has no choice but to be lonely because no one else is just gonna get me. No, I'm just goofing with that part. But in actuality, we see this really, really a lot. And we also see how controversial figures in this very male-dominated society and this narrative that maybe people don't care. I don't know. I care. For example, according to the ASA in the UK or the FTC in the US, there is a normalization of coercive framing in men's cologne advertisements. Direct regulations, rulings, or citations of emotional coercion or toxic masculinity posturing in men's cologne advertisements is historically non-existent. In a landmark 2019 UK ASA regulation successfully banned harmful gender stereotypes targeting tropes like clumsy fathers or helpless men, aka weaponized incompetence. Historical rulings against campaigns like Rihanna's Rouge or Marc Jacobs' Oh Lola, focusing primarily on explicit sexualization or depictions of scientific claims. Luxury brands successfully exploit abstract artistic expression to bypass watchdogs while also perpetuating toxic tropes nationally. The highlights of these institutional blind spots of media regulation inherently proves that while overt sexualization faces policing, especially when it involves a woman's body, the systematic architecture of purity culture and toxic masculinity in advertisement remains heavily protected under the gust of high fashion and artistic licensing. But we also have to think about a few other questions. What do actual focus groups or consumer research studies say when men report on their real motivations for buying cologne? Is it attraction? Is it self-confidence? Is it habit? Is it hygiene? There is, for men, a profound disconnect between hypersexualized corporate marketing narratives and actual consumer psychological drivers. Data from the olfactory research funds shows that men buy and wear scents primarily for personal self-confidence and daily grooming routines. Scent functions as a personal psychological armor or olfactory professional attire, rather than a mechanical tool for conquest. Men overwhelmingly desire inner emotional grounding and self-assurance over external romantic complications. Although this directly dismantles the fundamental myth of purity culture in grooming by showing that men themselves largely reject the predatory mating narrative in favor of self-care, you still are exposed to the corporate hypermasculinity that manufactures this imposition. So although that was just one study, we have to keep in mind, if it doesn't work, why do we still, for so many decades, have seen people from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and even early 2000s still doing it? Why are we still doing it? Why are corporations still doing this narrative? Because obviously there are people who still believe that these are the things that work. People still want to buy fragrances to be a chick magnet. I worked at the perfume section at my local Ulta, and I can guarantee you that if I tell a man this smells like sex, the man will buy it. I'd love to give a great case study to the Dior Sauvage case, especially in the timeline with the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp defamation trial.
Neither Dior nor Depp have commented on Wednesday's primetime airing, but last week the Wall Street Journal reported that the Oscar nominee's supporters have sent sales for the cologne soaring. And a Depp spokesperson praised the French fashion house for being, quote, steadfast and unwavering in its support.
When Depp's Sauvage contract, the Wild at Heart campaign, and Amber Heard's allegations become public, I want to give you the timeline of what happened with Dior and what happened then. Briefly. For example, in 2015, Baseline Contract established Depp as the face of the rebellion, untamed outlier, while also domestic abuse allegations surfaced publicly between 2017 and 2018 when active campaigns were running. The August 2019 cultural appropriation controversy over Native American imagery forced Dior to temporarily scale back visibility of that campaign. So if you remember, Johnny Depp was wearing like a headdress from Native American culture. There was wolf motifs, there was eagles. I remember this explicitly. And from what I know, Johnny Depp is not Native American. So we also see the Eurocentric predecessor in fashion houses, especially specifically in dynasty fashion houses, and how well those tied to the colonialism of beauty and fashion. This serves as a vital chronological case study showing how luxury brands tie their products to the mythology, directly to rebellion, defiance, and also still enact with legal controversy, weaponizing masculinity, matrimony, and even shielding themselves from criticism. Now, what do other domestic violence organizations make about the Sauvage advertisements? Major organizations like Women's Aid publicly condemns Dior's decision to maintain a heavily promotion version of Depp's advertisings. Critics also argue that the campaign framed domestic abuse findings as badges of rugged, misunderstood heroism and honor. The ad sent a profoundly damaging message to survivors about institutional accountability and corporate complicity. Advocates highlighted how high fashion marketing trivialized systematic domestic violence under the gust of edgy artistic freedom. Even though this is one case that is in the forefront of my mind, it is still a case worth discussing. How even though supposedly it goes against the idea of purity culture, abuse culture is purity culture because it's putting the forefront of the excuses onto the victim. It's putting the responsibility onto the victim. And when Dior did that, whether you believe in who or what, who or what was wrong, there was a narrative being built that showed that they didn't give a shit. It basically demonstrates how corporate greed actively can undermine the advocacy and work against purity culture. It shows how corporate greed can undermine advocacy work against purity culture and also financially reward by platforming toxic male impotency, while also perpetuating and normalizing domestic violence, which has already been shown in previous studies that we have talked about. During that time, Dior maintained absolute corporate silence regarding domestic abuse findings and advocacy groups' criticisms. There is a stark contrast between the superficial corporate social responsibility statements and the diverse version, total silence on gender violence. Dior leaned heavily into cultural polarization and anti-cancel culture sentiments to drive brand loyalty among specific demographic groups. Corporate financial interests were safely shielded behind the protective barrier of high fashion artistic autonomy. This highlights how corporate communication strategies shield toxic masculinity from accountability, reinforcing a patriarchal corporate culture that prioritizes profit margins over human safety and the ethical integrity. Keep in mind, the world's kind of fucked up a little because online search volumes for Sauvage surged around 48%, hitting an over 1.2 million searches in April 2022 alone. That was when the trials were going on. Social media video engagement spiked at 63%, reaching over 209 million viewers globally. The product cemented its status as one of the best-selling men's fragrances on earth, aimed intense cultural polarization. Fan-led counter boycotts successfully converted legal and domestic controversy into an aggressive, highly lucrative marketing machine. This provides empirical proof that consumers, fueled by anti-feminist backlash and toxic purity culture narratives, reward and financially sustain the exact archetypes of aggression, unaccountability, and masculinity that our media studies thesis seeks to dismantle. Overall, my ending statements. I ended up giving you a lot of information, but not my own recourse or interpretations. And rather, I want to take a moment to take a deep breath in and talk about that. When it comes to the general depiction and very macho realism of artistic expression in Cologne advertisements, we inherently see not just a colonial backing to the narratives and to the artistic imagery under the gust of artistic imagery, but we also see how it's more than a two-way street, where advertisements will perpetuate these things, but despite what other academic sources or more market research has said, it doesn't change the fact that we live in an anti-feminist society that performs and perpetuates the narrative being pushed back at us through marketing. Inherently, it is showing that corporation or corporate life is heavily anti-feminist and is highly patriarchal in nature, which has always been. Through the gust of explicitly artistic expression and very anonymous but also very polarizing advertising choices, basically inherently, even if it's funny, even if it's serious, either perpetuates purity culture, violence against women, or even worse, whether it's the 60s or up until now, a lot of advertising in a variety of different fields have basically perpetuated rape culture and, of course, normalized violence against women, along with acting on the alpha consumer, making men think that the right way to be mystique, to be wanted, is to not want to be wanted, to isolate. Basically, to become the alpha consumer is what is needed to become an alpha male, which we already know, if you know me well enough and if you watch my videos, no, that's not healthy. Does that mean you should stop buying men's cologne if you like to wear it? No. I just think we should be aware, and we should be heavily aware of the cultural significance of old dynasty cologne and fragrance brands and what they perpetuate. And maybe look into indie cologne brands, look into gender neutral fragrances if it bothers you so much. But rather, it's really interesting to talk about the semantics of what men's cologne advertisements explicitly or inexplicitly say about masculinity and women relationships. It ends up perpetuating a narrative of basically the victim mentality of the toxic man, hence the alpha male, always a lone wolf, always searching for meaning within themselves and never finding it with community. Basically, men's cologne advertisements have been quarry to the analogy of perpetuating the toxic lone wolf mentality, specifically the kind of masculinity that is perhaps a pipeline to more dangerous territory. Basically, it's a narrative that is creating a world that senses that women are unjustified and men are in injustice. It's making it sound like that men are the victims. It is basically a victim blaming narrative that is being created in the world of men's cologne advertisements, making the perception that men are never at fault, that men are the victim, that men are having a hard time right now, rather than the centuries long, since the dawn of patriarchy, women's struggles. Remember, this isn't a fight of man versus woman. This is us getting into what is perpetuated through men's cologne advertisements. And one thing that we must keep in mind, it's not just advertisements alone. It's basically a two-way street in the end. We don't do a good job keeping our side of the street clean either. What we see on TV is what we see for a reason, because that's what we see in real life, because that's what we act like. And it's just basically a back and forwards model of communication. By the way, my name is Mila Duffy. As we get to the end of this video, I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for being so awesome, and I would love it if you consider going to my Substack, Vanity Thoughts, and becoming a contributor, whether a free subscriber or paid. If you become a paid subscriber, you'll get over 9 to 10 months worth of archived content completely for you. And if you want to just be a free subscriber, you'll get access to the occasionally free podcast episodes like this, and of course, the twice a month newsletter called Vanity Decoded, where we decode what the beauty industry is trying to tell us about us this week. Thank you again for basically standing by me and tolerating the rebrand. And I hope you all have a fabulous day. And ta-ta!